Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where today we're looking at this bit of retro tech, the Sparq, which was a removable storage device made by Syquest in 1998 at the peak of the storage wars. The box proudly boasts its 1GB storage of its cards, which at the time was really impressive, as back then I was still using a computer with a 1.3GB hard disk, so I could have backed up almost the entire machine on a single card. It seems they used the same box for both the external and internal models, of which, as we can see, I have the external model, which uses a parallel port to connect to the computer. So let's open this up, shall we? And inside we have a plastic clamshell that holds everything else, and it will open up with a little bit of effort. Inside there is a vertical stand, the parallel connection cable, a power supply with a plug, a bag that contains a number of manuals and the driver disc, the external drive itself, and the starter cartridge inside this case. Inside the bag we'll find a disc with drivers for DOS, Windows 3 and Windows 9X, but you can also find drivers for other platforms like RiscOS if you look around on the internet. This wad of manuals includes quick start guides for both software and the hardware, with these extremely 90s promotional images inside. But if you want more information, you can look at the far more detailed booklet. Though there is this absolutely massive fold out chart that gives you all the information you need to know to plug it in. The drive itself has this sprung flap on the front, which you'll have to hold open if you want to insert one of the carts. Next to that is the eject button, which is the only way to get a cart back out of it. And around the side we can find a power switch, and then along the back we have a power input, and then ports to connect it to the computer, and a second one that acts as a pass-through so you can have a printer connected at the same time. The carts are roughly similar in size to a floppy disk, but are much thicker. And the read heads enter the cart through the front, which is done when this tab is pulled open by the drive itself. Though you shouldn't really try to open this up yourself, as the media inside is based on a hard disk platter, and is double-sided, and thus can be a little fragile. So let's get this plugged in and turned on. Now an important step is to make sure you have the starter cart in the drive before you try to install the drivers. Which you can find on this floppy disk. And after a few moments it will install enough of the driver from the floppy disk that you can get the rest of the installation from the cart itself. So if the cart isn't in the drive, it'll actually give you an error, which actually tripped me up at first. But we do have it inserted, so it finished the installation normally, and then gives us what looks like pretty much a regular CD-ROM auto start screen, which while it shouldn't have surprised me, I have to admit it really did. From this we can install the other tools for working with this drive, as well as various other software that they included in the package. And because why not, there's also a multimedia presentation, which is just a pure time capsule of the 90s.
Who do you trust with your life? Your business life? Your creative life? Who do you trust with all the important things you store on your computer? When it matters most, people store it on a Syquest cartridge. Award-winning Syquest is the single most recommended and reliable storage brand in the industry. Fast enough to get your files when and where you need them. And inexpensive enough to make Syquest the price-performance leader. The things you care about deserve to be stored on a Syquest.
This starter cartridge comes with so much software and demos to show off what you can store in it. There's actually only a few hundred megabytes free for you to put your own stuff on there. And because I don't want to format this cartridge and possibly lose all that amazing 90s goodness, I'm going to need a second cart. And here we have it. So let's switch carts and format it. And to get the cart out, you just press the eject button, and in a random amount of time, the device will suddenly, and with quite a lot of force, pop the cartridge out. And with the new cart inserted, let's try formatting it. And I have to say, this is a very, very slow process. So with the format complete and almost 1 GB of space to play around with, let's try installing some games to it. So then we can compare how long it takes to install, as well as see if there's any impact on load times when we play from the cart. For these tests, I'll be using my Pentium 200 machine that has a compact flash card running as the hard drive. I'll be installing from a CD to the internal drive, and then installing from the CD again to the Sparq. Now it might not be the most scientific of tests, but it should be fun. And to start it off, we have to install Duke Nukem 3D, as it's retro computer lore that it has to be featured in all videos. In the top left we have the Sparq, in the bottom right we have the internal hard drive. And we can already see the hard drive taking an early lead with having it installed where the Sparq is barely 50% through. Things tend to equalise out when we're actually playing the game, as it takes roughly a minute for both the hard drive and the Sparq to actually get into the game itself. So when it comes to actually playing the game, it's not too bad, though the installation times might be a bit of a problem. Let's see if this continues. Second is Battlezone, which is an absolute favourite game of mine. And as an aside, I do like installers that put a bit of effort in. You can't hear it here because it's sped up, but it has a full set of voiceovers during the installation that helps explain part of the story. As this game is over 3 times larger than Duke Nukem, we're starting to see how the Sparq is slower. It's already been running a minute longer than the hard drive and it's only 75% along. Now I've not done any tweaking of the parallel port settings, so it might be possible to get better throughput, but I decided that it was best to leave it as it was, as that would give me a nice consistent set of results for these tests. And as the game launches, we can see it starts with a 3D animated intro that streams from the CD. So this bit shouldn't really be a test of the drive, but it is interesting to see that it does run a little bit quicker when we're running from the Sparq. So it'll be interesting to see if this is replicated when we play the game proper. And, well, the hard drive loaded instantly, and the Sparq was actually only 10 seconds behind, which makes me think that the read time might be better than the write. And finally we have the original Unreal Tournament. Now this is by far the largest game we've tried to install, at over 600 megabytes. Even on the hard drive, it takes an age to install, almost 6 minutes. So the Sparq, it just kept going and going and going. At one point I was actually worried that it was going to fail because it started to make some really weird sounds, but after a few moments it sorted itself out and continued to install. And finally it finished at around about 20 minutes. That's 3 times longer than it took for the hard drive. So let's see how that plays out when we're actually playing the game. And it'll come as no surprise that the Sparq is falling behind here. In fact, the hard drive manages to load up the first map and even manages to get a second map loaded before the Sparq had even finished loading the intro. But what makes this worse is that when I was actually trying to play an actual level, it didn't get very far and it would crash. This happened every time I tried to play it. This was actually the best run I had, as most of the times it would actually crash while loading the intro map. So it seems that not all games are suitable for playing off the Sparq. And just to get an idea of what the actual transfer speed is, not what's written on the box, I decided that I need to back up this riff track short that I'd bought. It's about half the size of the cart, so let's start this going. Now initially Windows said it would take 5 minutes to copy, then quickly up that to 10. But even that was quite optimistic. As we can see, it was around 14 minutes later and still hadn't completed. By the time it finished, it was actually 15 minutes and 14 seconds. Now if we take the size of the file at 478 megabytes with 914 seconds, that means we had a transfer speed of 535 kilobits a second, or 0.52 megabytes a second, which is much lower than the 0.9 megabytes a second it was rated on the box. Now let's skip over all these dry numbers and check this out. This is me using the Sparq on my RISC PC 600. This is an ARM-based computer released in 1994. It originally had a 40 megabyte hard drive, and I've connected a 1 gigabyte cart. So let's try copying a few games onto it and running those from the drive. And what else are you going to copy? Well, has to be some Wolfenstein 3D, which takes a few seconds. And then I'm thinking of copying XOR, a game that I really loved when I played it on the Amstrad CPC. And here we can see that's it running from the cart. And it's actually running at a relatively decent speed. Yep, looks absolutely normal to me. I don't think you really even notice the load times. So for games like this, it's great. And for this type of computer with such a small hard drive when it first released, this must have been amazing as an upgrade. Now unfortunately, because of the version of RiscOS that I'm running, I have to format it in Acorn's own ADFS format. But if I was running a later version, I'd actually be able to look at DOS formatted disks. So if I actually want to use this cart again, I'm going to have to format it on my Windows PC. One of the downsides of these sort of drives is the fact that you can't read regular floppy disks with them, so you'll typically have to have this alongside a regular drive if you want to transfer data between other people. Another downside was that these drives were reported as being quite unreliable, which isn't what you really want from a device that's meant to help you back up your life, as it seems it was possible for a drive to damage other carts in such a way that it too would then break other drives when you inserted it, which would then break more carts, which would then break more drives. And very quickly, all your carts and all the disks would become paperweights. But trying to track down more information on this has proved to be quite hard. All the articles just seem to keep linking to each other in a very weird round loop, and there doesn't seem to be a single central source for these claims. But I've also read a report that this might have been FUD spread around by iOmega, who are doing their best to try and sync all the competition at the time, and Syquest were one of those targets. So which report is right? I'm not entirely sure, as most likely it's probably somewhere in the middle, as I have to admit I did have some issues with it reading some of my carts. It would just read it for a few seconds and then spit it out, or it would just keep it locked in the drive until you turned it off and on again. Now, all those problems went away on their own. As you can imagine, this was not great news for Syquest, who were really hoping that this was going to save the company, as they were in huge financial difficulties at the time. And then the company failed in short order. And because of that, these drives started getting dumped at bargain basement prices. You could get the machine plus 2 carts for as little as £16, and the price hasn't really changed all that much since. So if you do want one, they're not all that difficult to find. And so until next time, I've been the Goldfish. That was the last drive by the company that introduced removable storage to the world, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing and all that other gubbins, as it really helps the channel grow. Or you can check out other videos that you can find linked on the screen. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.